In a recent spectating video, I said this. I also believe that skill-based matchmaking should completely be abolished. I'll have a video discussing why that is soon. Funnily enough, I actually mentioned some of my thoughts to the Tactical Brit, and turns out he was working on a video discussing some similar things. The video is called, "This is what a bottom 0.1% SBMM lobby looks like." We're gonna watch this together, but while we do, I do have some pretty interesting points that I'd like to raise about the system we have now.
If you've ever wondered what the easiest possible lobby in Call of Duty Warzone looks like, the bottom 0.1%, the lowest amount of skill-based matchmaking, this video today is going to give you a window into that world.
Oh, this is rough. This is really rough. Oh my gosh. Now, he's probably trying to not raise his KD, because I'm telling you, the second that skill-based matchmaking latches on and sees that you're able to hit your shots or sprint very quickly or get on to doing contracts or literally anything that could show that it makes you a little bit better, it recognizes that. It sees it and immediately will change the kind of matches that you'll get. So when you're at a bottom 0.1%, it literally means you basically have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea how to play, and most likely you're never gonna get a win in the game unless it's against players just like you. Yeah, that's rough, man.
If you look around the content creation space, you can see lots of people who are accused of getting easier lobbies or bot lobbies. And sometimes they do just have a softer lobby, and sometimes they might be manipulating something. And sometimes they're just downright lucky. But what if I could guarantee that this is statistically the lowest KD lobby in Warzone and show you what it looks like?
Now, on the topic of what he said about people getting low lobbies, I would like to say, technically speaking, things like that are not in any form or fashion against terms of service. Things like reverse boosting, i.e. nading yourself on repeat just to die and get a lower placement in matches, that is against terms of service. Reverse boosting is absolutely against it. Boosting itself is also against it. Things like having another account hop in while you join on that account to get easier lobbies, technically it's not against it. On top of that, things like VPNs, which we will get into later, are also not against terms of service, even if they recently mentioned it in a patch note for Ricochet. Again, we'll get into it later, and you might have an opinion on it, but your opinion doesn't make it fact. So just keep that in mind. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but I just want to mention that to you early on because we're going to get into it later.
Well, that's exactly what I sought to do in this video today, and I did achieve it. In a Warzone environment where skill-based matchmaking is the norm, and that's just a fact of life at this point, many of you people will never see a lobby like this. And in fact, some of you watching this, the more casual of you who play the game from time to time, probably will, but just won't necessarily notice it. So join me again today for another deep dive on what the easiest lobbies in Warzone look like, and how the hell I managed to even get into them. And if you enjoyed this video, drop a like, subscribe as well. We're on the road to 200K, and I'd really appreciate your support.
As always, I have the Tactical Brits down in the description of the video. And for the record, I will never react to someone's video unless I have something interesting to say about it, or I have an opinion to share on the things that they say in the video. So don't ever think that I'm just going to react and be like, wow, it's not my kind of content. I always have something to add. And in fact, I actually reached out to Tactical Brit, and he said he was 100% okay with me reacting to his content, obviously as long as I have something to add.
And a big thank you for all of your support on my most recent Call of Duty content.
Which has been crazy.
This entire process has been a lot more complex than I anticipated it being. And if you've wondered why on stream I've recently looked quite tired, it's because I was getting up at 5 or 4 o'clock in the morning to actually achieve this.
What is going on?
I thought to myself, becoming a self-employed content creator meant that I'd never get up before 9, 10 a.m. again, and I was very deeply wrong. Being a content creator is very obviously a hard life, and you should all care about my very privileged tiers.
Oh my God.
But before I get into the crazy discoveries that I had doing this process, and I tell you, there were some really surprising ones, I just want to say that this entire video isn't to dunk on players who are low skill. You know, this isn't about, looking at the...
For the record, this is very important. What he is saying right here is very important, and why, whenever you watch someone that is doing 2-boxing or whatever for their content, why I see a lot of those people as pretty disgusting humans, is because when you look at people that are two-boxing, most often these people will do it and then drop really high gameplays and stuff like that. But if you see them do it while they're streaming, or sometimes it even shows up in their content, if a player plays a certain way that they don't like, they will whine and gripe about it, knowing that they're in a lobby that is much lower skilled than they are. So it doesn't make sense. You should just be happy that you got the eliminations that you got, but you shouldn't dunk on anyone for any reason if you know you're manipulating the matchmaking in some form or fashion. Hopefully that makes sense.
These guys going, oh man, look how bad these players are. Ha ha ha. You know, they're nowhere in the realm of what I am. At a fundamental level, video games are just video games. They're a way to switch off. They're a way to have a good time. And for some people, just playing a game and having a little run around is a lot of fun. And it doesn't matter if they win or lose. And good for them. And quite frankly, I hope they don't undergo the disgusting chemical composition change in my brain that means serotonin is directly related to skill rank. But because we live in such a restrictive SBMM environment, I figured it would make sense to show you guys what this world looks like. The process of recording this video was a lot more complex than I imagined. It involved waking up at different times of the day or recording at different times of the day to get a really large data pool and footage pool, really, of what this world looked like.
And to be clear, it is very important the time at which you actually play the game, because if you play it at a time where it's peak hours, there will be peak players, meaning there's enough players for you to hop in and get matched up with players of your exact skill, if not higher. And Call of Duty will do that, knowing that they can manipulate you into sticking on for longer. So just keep that in mind.
Because honestly, the biggest impact to skill-based matchmaking isn't just things like statistics, and it isn't just things like accounts, and we will talk about those. It's more to do with the fact that player population counts. SBMM works at its most efficient when it's late in the evening, and there are lots of people online, and it can use all of the algorithms and tools at its disposal to make sure that it feels the right people are playing with the right people. And early in the morning, when the player population is low, things tend to get a little chaotic in it.
This is the exact reason that most streamers will play early in the morning. I remember way back in the day, there was even big discussions about, are you VPNing? No, dude, you literally don't have to. You don't have to do that. You don't have to VPN. You don't have to two-box. You just have to not be a degenerate and wake up a little bit early. Hop on the game. This goes for anybody. Anybody. It's not just me. It's not just any other content creator. Hop on the game early and you should be good. You should get easier lobbies on average because there's not enough players. So you'll end up in lobbies based on the fact that they can't fill it with good players.
It kind of runs out of ideas and throws anybody anywhere just because. So this setup of recording at different times of day actually worked in conjunction with an entire separate system on an entire separate internet connection that had never played Call of Duty before, as far as I'm aware.
Interesting.
So to give you guys a full breakdown of me going full tinfoil hat, I didn't want any parameters where Call of Duty could associate the new account with an account that's been on my system.
Which is important.
I didn't want it to be like, oh, we know this hardware ID, we know that this guy plays games, this could just be an alt account. I didn't want it to be on the same console, the same.
To be clear, this is not tinfoil hatting. I know that he's saying that it is, but Activision has patents for things like this to literally see every single detail that could lead to an account being like another account. I'm starting to think, and don't get me wrong, Brooke is much better. Brooke, my fiance, is much better at the game than she was 2 years ago. But I also think for the longest time that because I was on a specific connection, she may have been getting harder lobbies. At some points, harder lobbies than me whenever back in the day, she started at a 0.8 KD. It made 0 sense.
Same IP address. I didn't want anything that could feasibly link this brand new, baby new account to my own account, which has been long-standing now for many years, and the statistics of which put me in very disgusting lobbies. So achieving that was actually a lot more technically challenging than you'd be surprised. So on top of that, I also had to record these lobbies at different times of day, because I wanted to see what early morning lobbies look like, and if SBMM had a panic attack, and if I got super, super easy lobbies. And then what do late day lobbies look like? Will SBMM be more efficient?
Good Lord,
Will I
have
get
mercy.
the lobbies that I'm supposed to get? All of this whilst playing on an account that didn't kill a single individual player, didn't change any settings, didn't shoot any shots particularly accurately, and didn't...
Usually I wouldn't point this out, but I am going to point it out. If you look at the player count right here, he does have an elimination, which again will directly affect the way these lobbies work. I just wanted to let you know that.
Even move, because these are all considerations that skill-based matchmaking takes into account. Even the amount your player traverses the map is considered to be a legitimate statistic in identifying whether it's a high-skill player or a low-skill player. And the footage in the background you're seeing of me spectating players very much will show you that these are the bottom of the bottom lobbies. We're talking about players crouching around and barely moving, hiding, playing very timidly, and playing very passively, which is what you would expect for newer players or players who aren't that confident in their own gameplay. And the process also involves completely ignoring things like levels and camos and prestiges, because just because somebody plays a lot doesn't necessarily mean that they are particularly good. Although I did have a number of incidents of cheaters who were level 11 who hacked in everything instantly, and good God, you would be surprised just how many cheaters actually ruined the number of games that I'd recorded. I had recorded about 20 different games across 2 or 3 different accounts, and I found that in those 20 odd games, I had suspected cheaters in about half of those, which is...
It is so much worse now than we've seen all throughout Warzone 3. And I'd like to take a moment to remind you that they said their goal with the release of Black Ops 6 is to have cheaters banned within 1 hour of them playing their first match. First of all, that's already not good enough. We are in a tough spot right now, and the game is not great with a lot of other issues, but cheaters are above and beyond right now. It is absurd, and I know you're feeling it. And broken spectating does not make it much better. It does not work in the slightest. You see people that maybe they're cheating, but you can't actually definitively say that because when you spectate them or you have a kill cam, it doesn't actually show what's happening on their screen. It doesn't show recoil control. It doesn't show what's on their minimap. It doesn't give you the same audio as them, which is, by the way, crazy. You will notice that if you listen to someone, then you will hear more shooting, basically, than they will while they're still alive. You'll hear random bullets flying in spectator mode that make no sense. So there's a lot of big issues that are taking away from us being able to even report people properly. And we're getting innocent people banned for nothing. Shadow banned, not really banned. They get unshadowed, but you keep them from playing for no reason. It's a whole thing.
Literally insane. And if any player felt like they were killed unfairly, there's a very good chance if it was their first game at Warzone, they would just quit if they'd realized.
Yep.
So what were the big surprises in all of this? And there were some interesting ones. And before I talk about like general player behavior, there were some very quirky behaviors that I hadn't seen in any of the lobbies that I'd ever played in. And granted, I don't hide the fact that I sometimes get soft lobbies, especially earlier in the day. And that's when I tend to stream. But some of this stuff I hadn't seen before. We're talking players just straight up hiding in rooms and not leaving for the entire match, and also what appeared to be some kind of bot system. There were a number of new accounts who were literally just landing in, going into a room or going into a random area, and spinning it looking at the floor. Enough of a threshold that they wouldn't get booted from the game, but not exhibiting any human-like behavior. And at first I thought maybe these were just guys who like ended up going AFK or like, you know, wanted to be on their phone or wanted to, you know, chat to somebody or whatever.
No, okay. He's probably going to say what I'm thinking right here, which is it is a secondary account that people have gotten some sort of macro, and they're using that macro to have this player spin in circles so that they can join on the account later on and use it to get easier lobbies. They don't play on these accounts. They use them as the reverse boosted account to 2-box into those lobbies. I almost guarantee it.
Whatever so happened to be. I mean, I've replied to numerous texts in games that I don't care about, so I know what that behavior looks like.
But this is too perfect.
But it seemed to be a bit more weird than that. These appeared to be actual accounts maybe training to level up or maybe training to build a history, possibly for nefarious purposes in the future. These were just straight up botnet accounts. The second big surprise was just the sheer number of people on their microphones. And I guess this shouldn't be a huge surprise because most players who are playing casually don't think about it, they don't adjust their voice chat, and the amount of PS5 controller microphones was truly mind-boggling. it was kind of interesting to see because I very rarely, if ever, see voice chat in any of my lobbies. But all of a sudden, I was seeing tons and tons of people talking all the time, most of them very clearly watching TV and stuff in the background. And honestly, the third surprise, and probably the nicest surprise in all of this equation about, seeing these kinds of lobbies, were people who are just genuinely having a good time. I mean, some of the stuff I saw was definitely like, holy crap, like, this is mind-boggling, and if I ran around in some of these scenarios, I'd be dead 6 times over in my lobbies. But, I had some really funny interactions of just like driving around in a helicopter and another helicopter showing up, or I met this dude who was driving around in a car. I was driving around.
I'm going to take a second to recognize the guy that he's spectating right now is actually multiple prestiges. So this goes to tell you what he was talking about earlier, where they may have more playtime and have been able to prestige or get camos and things like that, like he said, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're very good players. So if you ever see that in the bottom, just again, don't expect that to mean that they're a great player. They're just playing a lot badly.
Around in an LTV, and then he betrayed me and ran me over, which I thought was quite funny. Like, it's just a whole different world. And the final surprise, which was probably the least surprising if I'm being entirely honest, was the number of cheaters I encountered. And I do wonder at this point how heavy an impact cheaters are having on the overarching player base for this game.
Massive.
Because as somebody who's a hardened player, a top 1% player, hell, even a top 0.1% player, and I don't mean that as a flex, I mean that as a statistical fact. For me personally, I always come back and play Warzone because I enjoy the mid game. It's the game that
I'm so sorry. Did y'all see what's going on the screen, by the way? I'm so sorry. Can we go back for 2 seconds? I just need to recognize what happens here. So, let me go to my spectating. Okay, so right here, this guy's got a car just chilling, right? And if you watch,
it's a statistical
he
fact.
Doesn't attempt to fight it. He doesn't try and go for the elimination. If you keep looking at the minimap,
for me personally,
he keeps looking toward the car, right? But he's hiding behind the hill.
Because I enjoy the mid game. It's the game that I'm currently maining. But if you're somebody who plays very casually or from time to time, then your first experience is dying to somebody who's racked up 20 kills and has unlocked tooled everything. If you are, aware enough to clock on and notice this, chances are you won't play again. You probably will just drop off and be like, yep, Warzone scuffed, I'll go back to something else. So you might be wondering, why am I showing you all of this? And why am I talking about all of these abrupt surprises? And what is this whole video about? Well, part of it was just showing you a window into a very different world. The reality is that if you are above a 0.8 KD in this game, you are considered to be the average or above average for Warzone.
Correct.
So a lobby like this is something that you will very rarely, if ever, encounter. And if you do, there's a very good chance you won't notice some of the signs. And that's no disrespect to you as a player, it's just they are very different worlds to some of the lobbies that some of us play in, who are, 4 or 5 KDs or end up in the crazy stratosphere of competitive gameplay. And I suppose the second part of the equation was just another interesting conversation around skill-based matchmaking. Now, Sub1KD actually very recently made a video, and I'll leave a link to it in the description, where he effectively...
By the way, this video that Sub1KD was prompted by me, and it's the exact conversation that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video that I mentioned to Tactical Brit here, is that I had actually reached out to Sub1KD, and I was trying to figure out how skill-based matchmaking actually works in the game so that I can express to people and have somewhere to point whenever there's a question about it, because I constantly see people fussing on one side or the other as to whether or not it's good or bad, and there's just a big misunderstanding as to how it works. So I reached out to Sub1KD. Sub1KD gave me the information a little bit early, and I was going to make that video, but ironically, Tactical Brit was already working on this one, so I sent this information he's about to talk about to him.
He created a statistical model of what it would look like if in solos there was no SBMM and the matchmaking was completely random. And the distribution of players in those lobbies tends to fall in line with what you would expect if a random matchmaking pool were to happen.
I will note this information was pulled from the last time that we had API data from Call of Duty, which was the end of Caldera right before Warzone 2.
And what this means is that you would get players of various different skill levels and very rarely encounter somebody like myself of a very high KD status. Now, if you carried on doing that and you took away the lowest percentile of players, so players who had less than 0.5 KD, that number sort of created a bit more of a compact distribution, and that distribution had more players of slightly higher calibers.
So I'm going to pause this right here. I know, Expel, you've paused it a billion times, but let's check this over and let's look at the actual numbers, right? What you need to see is bottom 1% or bottom 10%, which is your KD ratio of 0.25. That's going to show up around 8 times per lobby, right? Average player for lobby is 8. Expected range, basically your encounter likeliness is very likely. And this gets lower and lower until you get to the point where you're at that top 1%, which is a 2 KD plus. And you can see that only 1 KD, say we completely get rid of skill-based matchmaking, it's completely gone out of the game, none whatsoever. That leaves you with 1 player on average per match. And what we've been fed to believe is that if we were to get rid of skill-based matchmaking, then what it would do is actually make it where really bad players constantly have to play with really good players. That's not how the numbers work in the slightest, like at all. In fact, even if, and I'm going to have to remove my camera, even if he were to remove the 0.5 KD and below, you can see it right here. The likeliness of you running into a top 1% player does double. However, 2 players out of 120 is nothing. It's nothing. It's actually laughable that is something we're seriously worried about. And the likelihood of them like taking over the lobby and destroying it is also very low, because we all know that a lot of these players are using methods to get easier lobbies, which is inflating their kill death ratio. And so when you have that just existing, it also means that if those things were gotten rid of, because if you do get rid of 2-boxing, because there's no way to do it, because you can't fight the system, you can't manipulate the system because there's nothing to manipulate. It's just based on what's close to you. If you do get rid of that, then that means that you don't have a way to inflate your KD. You don't have the ability to make yourself look like you're a better player than you are. So the number actually goes lower than this. It's actually just like 2 or lower than what that shows right there, which is absurd. And I'm going to pull us out for just a second here. And I kind of want to show you this JGod video where he actually talks about skill-based matchmaking and the way that it's manipulating players a little bit.
Let's say this is just high, and then this is low, and then this is average. What'll end up happening is in a normal like SBMM, the way we would want it to work is it would be something like this, where it'd be average, high, you'd get highs and lows. Maybe you get a highs for a while and then it stays and it'd be average for a while. Maybe it dips down one match, it goes back up. And then you have this oscillation or even fluctuation in your matches. When you're an above average player, or at least you have some experience with playing the game at a higher level, what ends up happening is you understand that when you're in these matches, you'll be able to recognize that it's a higher skill match right off the bat. And then you're going to pull out your Jackal, if it's the meta, or you're going to pull out XM4, whatever the meta weapon is going to be. And then you're going to kind of sweat it out using that good gun. When it dips to these other areas, you'll also be able to recognize that those are lower skilled lobbies. And what you'll end up doing is maybe picking out a weapon that is going to add a little bit more variety to the gameplay. This might be something where, hey, you know what? Now's a good opportunity to do my camos on my pistol. It's a good opportunity to maybe use a shotgun that sucks. Maybe I'm going to use a sniper that I'm not particularly good with. Even though it could be good, it's just the reaction time is going to be better.
Now, to be clear, what he's talking about is if it was a proper system that was only based on the things that Call of Duty say they based it on. I'll show you this right here. So Call of Duty actually dropped a bit of info some time ago talking about their matchmaking system. And what they did is they said, above all, connection matters most. But then we have things like playlist diversity, recent maps and modes, time to match, skill/performance, platform, voice chat. These things all come together to make the matchmaking system. Notice skill is over here, and it's basically in order of how it matters from top to bottom. Voice chat, obviously mattering the least. Input device, platform mattering a little bit less. Skill is supposed to matter less than playlist diversity, time to match, and connection. And I do actually believe that it's true. However, they put such a weight on skill that whenever they throw that in, it will mess with the matchmaking system. In fact, there's proof of that when we talk about, ironically, another Tactical Brit video where he talks about VPNs. And if you don't know, VPNs are one of the strategies that were used a long time ago to get into easier matches. So let's see what he has to say about this.
The thinking behind these services is that basically
He's talking about VPNs right now, is what he's talking about.
what will occur is that it will give you more lobby variance because it won't be accounting for things like SBMM, it won't be accounting for things like skill, KD, lobby composition. It will simply
Basically what we just talked about.
just be saying, right, this guy's connection data seems to be all over the place. It seems to be obscured and obfuscated. Let's just throw him into the best connectivity to make sure he has an okay gaming experience.
So what he's saying right there is that these things do matter. And when players would use a VPN, what they do is that they'd force their connection outside of their actual region. It wouldn't actually put them outside their region. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but it was kind of a middleman to say, hey, we're over here and my ping's actually really high. So it'd be like, okay, connection. We want to make sure we have a good connection. It looks like the ping's pinging pretty high. And then it would do it for quite a long time. So the time to match would also go pretty freaking high. And then when you finally make it to that skill, they're like, well, skill doesn't really matter all that much. We really want to make sure that they're getting into a game and they're having fun and they're getting that good connection. So once the system would realize that skill isn't the most important thing, then it would snap and all of a sudden your connection is what is actually important. But the issue with all of this is that it's not all that important whenever there's an opportunity to give players these harder lobbies. So let's say you're on at night and you can hop into crazy lobbies. Sometimes they will prioritize that skill-based matchmaking because they believe that it's gonna get you to stay on longer. The funny thing, when you look at this multiplayer matchmaking process, basically, is that they're using all these things to matchmake you, which is a little interesting because if you get rid of this and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, all of a sudden, you're left with just connection. You know what happens if you have just connection? You will get a quick time to match, which is the second most important thing. If you have just connection, it's not really gonna matter about the playlist diversity. It's not gonna matter about this recent maps and modes, the platform, the input device, the voice chat. It's always gonna go to who's the closest, right? You're gonna get the best lobbies every single time because you get the best connection. You're gonna have low ping, which would be incredible. And all of this is to say, it's not actually about skill. What they're doing is they're leveraging all of this, which I hate that they make you read between the lines. Is engagement something that you use to matchmake? And they say no, but then they show us that quite literally their only focus is engagement. Now, you might also ask, and I realize that I'm going on a very long tangent here, and we are going to get back to the Tactical Brit video. You might also ask yourself, so what? So what if they're trying to talk me into playing the game longer? Well, think of it this way. Call of Duty goes out of their way to ensure that you're going to play longer, right? Why would they want that? Why do they care about retention? Well, the same reason that YouTube and TikTok care about retention. The more time you're on, the more money you make them. When it comes to Call of Duty, it's not about the fun, it's about the manipulation, where they try to manipulate you into playing longer so that you will feel like you have spent enough time to go into the store and spend money on microtransactions. So at the end of the day, while you may not be the person that does spend that money, someone's going to. Someone's always going to. And it's the same reason that their profits go up, even though sometimes their players are going down. That's all I'm gonna say on that topic. I just wanted to be very clear. The matchmaking system isn't about skill, and SBMM is an issue, but it's that when you mix all of this together, it's all about engagement, making you spend money, and just doing that on repeat until we're all broke and they lose all their audience, and it keeps repeating over and over, because when they lose all their audience, there's a whole new bunch of people that come in with the next game, which is why they do the yearly release dates. So hopefully I don't get blacklisted from something for saying all this. I'm just letting you know that was what I wanted to say. And that's why whenever people say that engagement optimized matchmaking doesn't exist, it's right there in front of you. Use your eyeballs, use your brain.
And the reason why this window into this lobby is just so much more interesting is because for a lot of you, you might not realize that you are in an easy lobby. And this isn't me cooking my own audience or cooking some of you guys. I'm sure a lot of you are very highly talented players. But there is a perception gap between what statistically actually is the case and what people believe. Like, it is the case right now that if you have above a 0.8 KD, you're considered to be a good player. And if you have a positive KD, you're considered to be in the top 20% of players. Battle Royales are brutal. They are extremely brutal games. So, although it might seem like a streamer has an easy lobby or a content creator has a bot lobby, and I'm not debating that some of those things do exist.
They do.
The reality for the most part is that it's basically impossible to see what the lowest level.
For the record, if you look at this guy, I'm pretty sure this is the guy he was talking about that was cheating based on the way that he snapped onto that targeted distance. I could be wrong, but just off rip, that's what it looked like.
Looks like, unless you've done a practical experiment like I've sort of done. And most of you who operate in the average KDs of the Warzone realm, so, you know, your 0.7s, your 0.8s, or even your 1.0s, which still technically makes you a better player, because the majority of players fall into those categories, when skill-based matchmaking's working on you, especially in something like solos, which is a bit easier to judge, squad matchmaking gets a little bit more tricky. Generally speaking, you are playing players of your own skill caliber, and that in itself is going to feel sweaty and skill-based and problematic, even when in reality, it's just people who are just like you. So I guess in a lot...
And to his point here, this is exactly where the confusion with who's good, who's bad, who's cheating, and who isn't cheating comes into play. Because when you think that players only are at your skill level because that's what you're being shown, or, you know, whatever, basically what's going to happen is that engagement optimized matchmaking that's going to kick in for someone else is going to throw them in your lobby. It's going to make you believe that they're cheating. When you believe that they're cheating, you're going to be like, well, what's the point? You're either going to quit the game, you're going to stick through it, or you're going to go get cheats for yourself. And that's why something like this is, sure, good for making them money, but it's also making the cheating situation so much worse. So much worse. And so when you add all these things together, sure, you know what? We're glad you're making money. We're glad that you're getting record numbers. But when you're constantly ruining the way that people see their peers for the sake of those profits, it's horrendous. It's so upsetting. And I hate the mindset that comes behind that, because we know for a fact that data can be flawed. We saw that Warzone 2 was built fully around the fact that they had data that basically we love being slow. Everything needs to be slower. We need to make sure we're reloading slower and we're aiming down sights slower. We can't bunny hop. We can't slide properly. We can't dive. We can't do all this stuff. But guess what? Warzone 2 had the worst release of any Call of Duty ever. They had the highest peak and the lowest drop ever. Literally, they had more players that were willing to play Warzone 2 than Warzone 1 ever had at any given moment. I'm not joking with you. You can look it up on Google. You know what? I'll show you. Hold on. So if you pull up Google Trends and you type in the search term Warzone, you can see basically this right here is where Warzone 1 was released, right? It was right here, and it had some big peaks, big peaks, and then it slowly starts tapering off. Right here is right before Warzone 2 gets released. But if you look right here, you can see 100% the absolute max number of people trying to figure out what's going on with Warzone. Almost, 25% more people than during COVID entirely. It is absurd that that number was there. And then immediately it dipped down, not just to where it was before, but much lower than it ever did with Warzone 1, just to prove that the data that Call of Duty has on the back end, believing a very specific thing about players, was completely incorrect. Just because players are bad doesn't mean that they don't want to try to improve. And that's why skill-based matchmaking, once again, is hurting the player base, because no one has to improve. No one gets to improve. They never fight someone better. They never fight someone worse. They always are stuck in that riding the highs and lows of engagement optimized matchmaking that's meant to just throw you a win every once in a while so that you stick around because you're like, oh, maybe I'm getting better. But realistically, you're not. You're not getting better. You're just getting scammed, bro. That's what's going on.
Long-winded way, this video shows you why skill-based matchmaking exists. Yes, all of you experience it, and the majority of you who play from 5 PM onwards to the end of the day probably get little to no variance in your lobbies.
Right.
But the reason it exists, and the reason why even if you're 0.8 playing another 0.8 and that feels challenging to you, is because if it didn't, people like the people in these lobbies would also be part of the equation. Now, granted, skill-based matchmaking's not a perfect system, and lobby variance generally could be better. And I find lobby variance early in the day to actually be quite healthy, and most of the time you tend to run into a pretty good mixed bag of sometimes sweaty and sometimes quite easy. But that's from my perspective as somebody who has played this game religiously, competed at the World Series of Warzone. You know, I'm not debating the fact that I have excessive amounts of hours in this game. Whereas for some of you, a lobby like this might just feel light or soft or medium spicy, just depending on your own skill caliber. If you've engaged with and watched this video, there's a very good chance that you're a highly skilled or highly engaged Warzone community member.
Which means you probably aren't the dude, well, not this guy, but the guys that are playing, or gals, that are playing in these lobbies. Because you probably aren't on Twitter. You probably aren't looking up YouTube videos. You probably don't care to figure out how to get better at the game. You're just there to hop on after work and you're playing the free-to-play Call of Duty.
And everything I've just said doesn't really apply to you because you're probably above a 1 KD. I'm going to loop back to talking about some of the player behaviors and things that are just radically different from my lobbies of somebody who plays in quite sweaty ones versus the lobbies of a statistically anomalous example. The biggest ones for me were slowness, tracking, and fighting the controls. Now, by slowness, I just mean, not moving from position to position, generally taking it quite slowly, being quite passive with gameplay. And I'm not saying this is a critique, and I'm not saying this is wrong, it's just an assessment of what these lobbies look like. The next one's tracking. You can see from a couple of these Gulag clips, and this was on a highly delayed input, I was trying to zip around a little bit just to get a read of what these guys' tracking was like, and almost all of them weren't the strongest aimers in the world. And I think that links into my third point, which is fighting controls. I really dislike that Warzone needs 75 different settings adjustments for people to feel comfortable.
Iceman Isaac released an hour-long video that is completely packed full of information on how you can set up your controls and your settings in Warzone. And even for me, having to be an active listener, and this is coming from someone that makes 45-minute to 1 hour long videos, having to be an active listener and go through that video. And this is nothing against Isaac or the content in general, more against Call of Duty that this exists in the format that it does. But that existing and having to be an active listener in that just makes me not want to play, right? Knowing that I have to do all this. That's why when I make settings videos, I literally just post screenshots. It's because I'm like, you know what? I'm trying to not waste your time. But Call of Duty forcing that upon people because, one, they give you the worst settings ever when you start the game up, but also making it where you have to change these settings to get the most out of your game, it's pretty goofy.
And most of them are hidden away in menus. Granted, the average Warzone player is better than you anticipate, and most of them will do their own settings and will do stuff like that before diving in. But I really wish they generally just made it a loading up into the game kind of thing of like, hey, this is what this sensitivity looks like, this is what this one does, this is what this one does, pick the one you like the most. I really feel like stuff like that would go a long way in helping out players who are newer to the game. And generally speaking, in the lobbies that I play in and with the creators I play with and the competitors I've played with, these are people who have dialed in min-maxing everything to a T. Settings, movement, controls, recoil, head glitching. Whereas most of these guys are sort of fighting the systems around them to get some kind of fluid gameplay going together. Which is why I feel there's such a big disconnect between what the top 1% of players looks like and what the vast majority of the player base looks like. And I think it's something that, in my opinion, is mostly addressable. And I suppose the final point and reason that this video exists.
That was huge, by the way. Just recognizing the difference between a bottom and a top player is so exponential that you really don't realize it. And again, I feel like bridging that gap to where people show up in lobbies more often, and you see people like that, you know, like back in my day when I was a child, you saw somebody good, you sent them a friend request. And every once in a while, don't get me that wrong. I'm having a stroke. Don't get me wrong. That still happens, but it's very rare that it's not an immediate accusation, but instead people sending a friend request and being like, wow, that guy was good. So I again, just another reason to bridge the gap.
Is that although skill-based matchmaking isn't perfect, and although I have my criticisms of it, and Lord knows I have in the past, I'm not going to pretend I haven't been a yapper. As a content creator, believe me, my opinions change like the seasons.
You have to.
But for the most part, it's a necessary evil, and it needs to exist. Content creators and people like myself of high KDs who have, you know, high play hours on this game, play it all the time, have 4 or 5 KDs and run around these lobbies, have normalized a conversation about skill-based matchmaking being a bad thing. When in reality, it just means that players like myself are statistically so much less likely to compromise a lobby like this one, or a lobby like all of the ones.
I like the idea of what he's saying. And again, it falls into the category of it should make sense. It doesn't. It realistically doesn't, because again, if you go back to what sub 1 KD share, let me see if I can go back to that. What you will see is that we will not compromise this lobby. I know what's going to come from this. I can already feel it. I can already understand the conversations that are going to happen in the comments, and hopefully I can point to me saying this right now. I do not want to play in bot lobbies all the time. This is the exact reason I don't 2box. This is the exact reason I don't VPN, is because I don't want to play in bot lobbies. I don't want to make content on bot lobbies. And I'm sorry for calling them bot lobbies, but that's just the best way that I can explain it very quickly. I don't want to play in low KD lobbies. I don't want to play in the worst players' lobbies ever. I know that there's creators that do, because it makes it easier for them to get content. That's not where I'm at. I do want just a healthy variance in my lobbies, because I want things to be connection-based and completely random. That's how it was back in the day. You could play against all kinds of other players, and everyone knew that there was all kinds of other players, but now you don't get that. You don't get the variance, and we would not, based on this right here, ruin those lobbies. And even if you felt we would, the lobbies that he was in, sub 1 KD, based on the conversation that I had with him, even went out of his way to remove that bottom percentage of players, you still don't compromise that lobby or even come close to it, because the vast majority of players are going to fall into this percent. There's just a common misunderstanding that it is a necessary evil, when in reality, it's simply not. It does not make sense that it ever would be, because you can see the numbers right in front of you. It would make sense if you needed it, if the vast majority of players fell into the bottom 10%. And there was that big of a discrepancy between the top percentage and the average player. But there simply isn't. There is not. Like, you're not going to run into your youngsters, your shotsies. You're not going to run into scumps 24/7. You're going to see one of those players per lobby, if you even see them, because you're going to die to a player that's at the same skill level as you. There's really no way around it whenever you look at the actual numbers, the statistics, because even if you protected the bottom 0.5%, I know I'm beating a dead horse, you just wouldn't see those really good players. In fact, you probably see the good players now more because of the fact that they can 2box and get into the lowest skill lobbies, which is crazy. We get rid of that if we get rid of skill-based matchmaking. The fact that reverse boosting, 2boxing, VPNing, and stuff like that exists is only due to skill-based matchmaking. I love you guys. I'm sorry if I sounded like a goober. I am a goober. That's it. That's what I got. Subscribe to the Tactical Brit. He really does have some incredible videos. I really recommend it. He's always in the description of the video whenever I talk about stuff. We may have differing opinions on certain things. He is a very intelligent guy, very good at the game. And I definitely think that watching his content is absolutely worth it on your end. We will have some more content, opinionated, stuff like that coming very soon. Have a good day. Goodbye.